COVID-19. For this meeting, members will join by telephone or other electronic means. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Regrettably, this method of holding a meeting limits our ability to hear public comment from residents. In lieu of public comment, I encourage members of the public to email council members directly. Our email addresses can be found on the council's website under the About Us section. I ask that members, again, state their names when they're speaking to ensure members of the public can follow our discussion with ease, and please refrain from talking over other speakers. When you make a motion or a second motion, state your name so we know it's been made and seconded, and Jenna can record this information in the minutes. Because we are conducting a meeting electronically, all votes will be taken by roll call. When we do so, Jenna will call the roll in alphabetical order. When your name is called for each vote, please clearly state aye or nay for or abstain so I can determine whether a majority is voted in favor of a motion. During the course of the meeting, if you leave the location from where you're participating, just let me know so we can ensure we have a quorum throughout the meeting. Any questions before we proceed? All right, if not, Jenna, can you take a roll to determine quorum?
Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Sterner. Ziran. Barber.
Here. With a quorum, then I will call the meeting to order. Our first item of business is approval of the agenda. So anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Cummings moves approval.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Second. Gonzalez.
Second by Gonzalez. Any other discussion? Hearing none, could you call the roll, Jenna?
Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Ziran. Barber.
Aye. All right, our next order of business is approving the minutes from the June 8th, 2020 meeting. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the minutes? If not, I entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Chambliss.
Moved by Ferguson, moved by Gonzalez, second by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll?
Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Ziran. Barber.
Aye. And the minutes are approved. Next, we move to the tab liaison report from June 17th. Mr. Dugan.
Okay, it should be, join me. I just got jumped. I don't know what I did, but I just got jumped off for a second. Oh, here we are. Oh. Great. Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Greg, I'm getting a lot of reverb. How about now?
Better.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Vice Chair and committee members.
You're actually in twice. I'm going to take you out once.
I'm sorry?
You're actually logged in twice.
Oh, okay.
See if we can
Yeah, I'm not sure how that happened.
try it now once.
All right. All right. How about now?
Better.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, committee members, General Manager Koistra, Director Thompson, Jenna, thank you for everything, and Greg, thank you. Because many of the items are going to be given to you or presented to you by staff, I will skip over the actual items from the TAB meeting and go right to the agency reports. And before I do that, I wanted to cite from the last meeting that we were together in April, both Vice Chair Chambliss and Councilmember Atlas Engelbretson had some very good suggestions regarding regional solicitation, community outreach, and engagement. And I wanted you to know that through the input of Chair Barber, that the executive committee of the TAB is going to be attempting to host small town meetings in the Twin Cities so that everyone can participate. The manner of which the participation will be obviously is virus related and will unfold, but that your suggestions, Madam Vice Chair, were heard loud and clear and have been acted upon. And perhaps I'll bring that up the next time I see Councilmember Atlas Engelbretson. And also, we're going right into the MAC, and Councilmember Zirin had several questions last time. So, Madam Chair, if he has any further questions on the MAC, I could communicate with him directly. In terms of statistics for the MAC, this week they are at 134 flights a day. In August, it's expected to be 230 flights a day. May 2019 was 544 flights. Delta expects, or the airport expects to be operating at 100% by 2022. I bring this up because many of your constituents will have questions on what is happening in the airport. Is something they can see and taste themselves. Delta is operating 70% of its flights, however, only at a 60% capacity. They are adding some international flights week to week. They do require masks, both in line and on board. They're loading front to back, again, to keep the social distancing in place. And the middle seats are not being used. Sun Country, in comparison, another airline, obviously an airline that is hubbed at the Minneapolis airport or MSP, you cannot reserve the middle, but that doesn't mean that Sun Country may not use it for either overload or sold at the airport. In regard to TSA, they are adding more security points, and they are using what is called a horizontal serpentine system, queuing up system to give social distancing. They also have plexiglass barriers for the officers, and all airport employees are required to wear masks. The question came up, and it was a very good one. What if a passenger does not wear a mask on board when asked to by the crew? It was the representative of the MAC said only the FAA can mandate masks while on flight. So the crew is really not able to do anything. In regard to the MPCA 2 developments, the money from the VW settlement phase 1 is paying for 1,100 miles of electric vehicle charging stations, which will be completed by September. Phase 2, which will add an additional 2,500 miles of charging stations, will be starting in the fall from 2020 to 2023. And through Jenna, if you'd like, the PCA has several mapping guides to where the location of the chargers, the routes that they will follow, and the overall mapping of where they will be inserted. And Jenna, as I say, can provide that. Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's no questions, I will conclude my remarks.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions for Mr. Degan? All right, hearing none, we will move on to reports, and thank you, Peter, for your report. First, we have MTS Director Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. A couple updates today. Today, we started the scoring committees for the regional solicitation. So we'll be scoring all the applications over the summer. Each category in the regional solicitation has separate scoring teams that are chaired by either staff from a city, county, or Mndot. And then MTS staff provides scoring and support to those committees. And so that is underway. And all is going well there. We have participation from almost all counties and several cities in the region. They always shout out to them for helping in this process. In terms of operations, our We continue to provide the special services on Metro Mobility and Transit Link for essential worker transit, food delivery, grocery, pharmacy. We also continue to provide only solo passenger rides on those services. We expect to continue this at least through July. These services. We're watching the demand on Metro Mobility and see if we need to make changes. Our biggest potential change is the adult daycare and training and rehabilitation centers. As they begin to open, which they began last week, that will create some more demand for our regular customers. However, those are opening as you would expect. They're a very vulnerable population. They're opening very, very slowly, so there's very little demand there. So it allows us to continue to offer essential worker food delivery services as we have, which we're happy to do. In terms of our contracted transit, we've been doing temperature checks on all staff starting last week. That's going fairly well. We continue to provide testing, COVID testing for asymptomatic, for any of the workers on those, and that is happening. And we did have a few positive tests last week. The week prior to that, we had no positive tests, which was our first week since March, where we had no positive tests, which was good news. We have a few contracting changes. The first one is Metro Mobility East. The contractor was notified that they had 90 days to leave their facility by the owner. And so we have been working closely with them to minimize or try to have no disruption for our customers. And they started at a new location in St. Paul today. And everything's worked out fairly well. We did exercise some emergency procurement procedures that the council provided to make sure that that went as smoothly as possible. And that contractor is First Transit, but it is going well. Also for Metro Mobility South, if you recall, back in March, we awarded a new contract to Transit Team on that contract. And that required a switching contractors from First Transit to Transit Team. This committee had asked for an update on how that was going, specifically an update about the impact on any of the employees that work for First Transit, with obviously some concern of what would happen to them in the transition to a new contractor. There's a couple of things that have happened that have turned out really well for those employees. First of all, since March, First Transit has won a new contract with the council to provide Transit Link service. And so several of those drivers on Metro Mobility will switch over to Transit Link service. They're a perfect fit for that type of service, a similar vehicle, and some good familiarity with that type of service. But also Transit Team has actively tried to hire as many First Transit drivers as are willing to move over to them. And they've hired 69 of the 120 drivers so far from First Transit. And they continue to do some hiring. And then First Transit itself has said they've been able to place all of those drivers on either the Transit Link contract or other contracts. So we believe that none of the workers that were impacted will be without a job. They all had an opportunity for another transit-related job, either with Transit Team or First Transit, which is good news. The other important part of that is that the customers on Metro Mobility who had expressed concern to this committee about switching to a new contractor and losing or having to change drivers that they were used to. I think most of our customers, majority of our customers will see the same driver under Transit Team as they had with First Transit. So that is good news. And I think the customers should be happy with that transition. The official transition begins on August 1st. And so hiring, of course, begins before that. And we make sure there's a smooth transition between workers. So that is going well on our contracted transit services. So, and with that, Madam Chair, it concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
This is council member.
Sorry, it's muted. Councilmember Chandler. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks for that report, Mr. Thompson. And I have a question about the pay equity. Is the pay equitable from transition from First Transit?
Madam Chair and council members, it's the new contract. The council sets the minimum wage in these contracts, and the transition from the old contract to the new, the minimum wage is increasing to $17.50. And many of the First Transit drivers were underneath that pay rate under the current contract. So I expect that many of them may see an increase in pay. But once we're completed, that is something that a specific analysis we could do. I don't have the exact answer offhand, but because the base minimum wage is increasing, I expect that many will see an increase in pay as they transition to the new contractor. And the Transit Link contract also saw a major increase in the base wage compared to the prior existing contract, and so that is increasing too, the minimum wage.
That's great. Could we get a report back closer to the time that they get to that August date on the hiring numbers?
Yes, Madam Chair, committee members, yes. Well, I'll give another report as we get closer.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Any additional questions for Director Thompson?
Chair Fretson here.
Councilmember Fretson.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for the update, and I appreciate the efforts to ensure that we retain our folks and obviously continue to pay them either consistent or more from what they were being paid before. So thank you.
All right. Any additional questions, comments? All right, then we're going to turn to General Manager Koistra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start with a COVID update and begin there with ridership. Systems ridership continues to be down significantly. Last count, it was down 69%. These are figures from June 19. Buses down 62%. Blue Line and Green Line are still down around 80%, and North Star's down 98%. Have seen a slight increase in bus ridership from where the decline peaked. So I think bus ridership has improved somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 6% from where it was peaking in its decline before. I'll also mention the total number of Metro Transit employees who have tested positive stands at 41 employees, and this includes people who have recovered and are already back to work. Bus operation sick list. The good news is bus operation sick list is down to 141 operators. That's compared to over 460 operators on the sick list at this point last month. We've added service and capacity to our routes. We're focusing on adding capacity to our core local routes that are seeing less ridership decline so that we can ensure to support social distancing. We're adding dozens of extra trips each day without fail. So we're trying to take full advantage of the extra operators that we have now and using them to help ensure social distancing in where it tends to be the busiest, and that tends to be the core local routes. Employee temperature testing like MTS continues to expand. We're rolling out on-site temperature testing for employees to operational facilities today and tomorrow. Today included Hiawatha, LRT, Overhaul Base, and South Garage. On Tuesday, we're going to add St. Paul LRT, Transfer Road, and Nicollet, and MJR. And then Wednesday will be Haywood, East Metro, North Star, and the rail support facility. Rail and bus operations, again, are joining Metro Transit Police Department, TCC and RCC, the Transit Control Center and the Rail Control Center, in on-site testing. And I heard today it went very well, and the operators, most of the operators appreciate it. I haven't heard about complaints, but some have commented how they appreciate that we're doing the testing. We're also installing sneeze guards on buses. We're calling them sneeze guards because they're different. They're kind of barrier lights on buses where we don't have barriers installed yet. As you recall, we're still receiving barriers from the manufacturer. We will install those as they come in. But we're trying to provide a plexiglass barrier for all buses between operators and customers that don't have the barriers installed, and that will allow us to move back from rear door boarding to front door boarding and beginning to collect fares on board again. And we're projecting that installation will be complete somewhere in around July 20th. So we're going to go back to front door boarding somewhere between July 20 and August 1st. Metro Transit operations staff is also finalizing plans to distribute thousands of rewashable fabric face coverings to customers at our highest volume boarding locations later this week. You may recall on that note that we were short masks for some time, and we were a little stingy with the masks because we had no choice. We've gotten a couple of shipments of masks in, including shipments from the federal government. So now we have masks, and we're developing plans right now to distribute thousands of those masks to our customers. PPE tote bag refresh kits have been distributed to all the operating facilities for bus and train operators. Each kit includes the In This Together tote bag, hand sanitizer gel, fabric and disposable masks, gloves, and a face shield. There'll be enough masks that if they have a rider that wants to use one, they can hand one out. They won't be distributing per se. That will be done in the way that I mentioned before, but there will be extra, each operator will have extra masks that they can share with people who need them. Lastly, I want to mention that we had a donation drive on Saturday. Metro Transit's donation drive was a partnership with the nonprofit We Push for Peace, and it was a big success on Saturday. Metro Transit staff and community members donated needed household items like diapers, formula, personal hygiene items, non-perishable food, and those items were filled and were loaded into I believe 2 buses and distributed Saturday afternoon at PV Field Park in Minneapolis. We also distributed face masks there. And attendees were encouraged at PV Park to sign up for the Transit Assistant Program that, as you know, provides $1 rides on transit for qualified low-income individuals and families. Our Transit Assistant Program staff are working to confirm a final enrollment count, but they said it was probably the biggest single-day registration event of the year. So that's good news. And I'll just mention that I was at the Haywood Garage where people were bringing their donations and were loading them on buses. And this is certainly worthwhile work for the communities, but I will say it was worthwhile also for our agency staff who like everyone wanted something to do that they could help the communities, and it was certainly a win-win. But certainly the most important thing is getting these household items to the communities. But I'll just say we benefited as an agency doing this work. So that's the completion of my report, Chair Barber, and I can also take questions if people have them.
Molly, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering, given the success of the donation drive, do you plan to do it again?
Well, I forgot to mention that we're also working with the city of Minneapolis and some of the grocers who were put out of business in that area, particularly Cub, in providing additional trips to other grocery store alternatives and working with them to better market where other grocery stores are. So that piece going. But to your particular question about whether we want to do this again, I think that's a great question, because what we've talked about is this being a good start of something more to happen, and maybe something more to happen on a reoccurring basis. We're going to learn from it. But again, it's good for the community, and it's good for our staff, and I think we're hoping that it is a start of something more.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair Barber. Let's Mr. Director Koistra, I was curious about when those face masks will begin to be distributed.
Councilmember Chambliss, I think the intent is to try to start this week with distributing those face masks. I haven't checked in with operations staff today on that, but that was the plan last I heard, was they're going to try to start this week and go to some of the busiest bus stops and transit centers in the area and use that as a place to start distributing them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, additional comments, questions from council members? Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really happy that we stepped up in the short term around supporting the needs in communities that are hurt by not having pharmacies and grocery stores. I also would just say that, for example, I've been really active on West Broadway in North Minneapolis in the last couple of weeks, and am concerned about a store that wasn't damaged in the way that stores were, and the rest, like of South Minneapolis, is taking an opportunity, a business, to disinvest from a community. So I also think that we have to be careful that we don't enable that disinvestment, and to call out inequitable treatment when it's occurring as well. And so I would just welcome an opportunity to be a part of a more nuanced conversation or understanding about what's happening in communities. We saw this happen after, I wasn't quite born yet, but after the uprising in 1968, that businesses used these opportunities as a way of disinvesting, and communities allowed it. And so I think we need to make sure that we're not a part of enabling that disinvestment, making sure we balance the needs of addressing communities' needs, as well as ensuring that we're working with city officials to communicate the importance of having destinations in communities that people can access via their public transportation. I hope that makes sense, and if it doesn't, please feel free to ask me any clarifying questions about it.
Councilmember Barber, if I can just comment on that, because I think that it's really a worthwhile point to discuss in the future as well. But just mention that part of our work in providing rides to alternative locations where they've lost, for example, grocery stores and so forth, has been done in coordination with the city, with just that interest in mind, where they're trying to help preserve the business for franchisers and so forth in the area. This particular one was the Cub Food that was burned down. And I appreciate the concern you're raising, and I don't say this in any way to discount that. I just wanted you to know that the call we got from the city to join with them on this was part of their attempt to preserve the rebuilding of infrastructure that would be located in that community. And I don't know the details behind the thinking there, but that was how they pitched it to us.
Chair, if I could.
Of course, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that's great, and I just want to make sure that we're also aware of the efforts that can be in place to disinvest, and that we're going into those situations aware of that practice and just thoughtful of it. So it's not to say don't do it. It's just to say, just being really thoughtful about the role we can also play to ensure that communities have destinations within them that are vital for us having a community that is sustainable. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Wes.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. That was a good discussion, a good point to bring up. I know Mr. Dugan had a question or a comment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Wes or General Manager Koistra, I just wanted to give you a comment from, boots on the ground, so to speak. I have a fair amount of clients in the Lake Street area, pretty much from 35 over to about 33rd Street. And I was there for an extended part of the day on Thursday, and I saw a number of your Metro Transit buses, working the area. And I must say, I was so taken with the professionalism of your drivers. And the one in particular, I couldn't get her name, but she was most gracious in trying to help the folks get on and off the bus. And what struck me was that her face just read patience. And it's, tempers are short, or I shouldn't say tempers, but, people jittery, and this was a route that probably was improvised because of where it was. It was over by the Cub and Target in the 7 Sigma area, which was burnt. And anyway, she acted quite professional, and I did observe that several times in my time on Lake Street. And if I may, Councilmember Atlas Engelbrecht, in my opening remarks or my tab liaison report, the last time we were together in April, you and Vice Chair Chambliss had some very interesting and perceptive suggestions regarding community outreach and engagement in regard to the regional solicitation. And I wanted to let you know that those were taken seriously. And through Chair Barber, the executive committee of TAB is going to, it has on its priority list a series of small town meetings throughout the Metro to address equity and to ensure that everyone can participate. Obviously, the manner of those meetings will be decided, in the future, depending on the virus and whatever. But I just wanted to let you know that had happened. And thank you, Chair Barbara, for letting me comment.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions or comments for General Manager Koistra?
Councilmember Barber, if I could just respond and thank and express my thanks for that comment. We pass those on to our garages. They're very committed to their communities. I just want you to know that it's so great to hear those comments, and I'm always passing those on to the garages so they can pass it on to the operators. They need to hear that, and we need to hear that. And I just really want to express my thanks for that comment.
You're welcome, sir. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get her name, but it was traffic and things, but I'm sure she'll do it again and get recognized.
And before we move on, I just want to follow up with that to both General Manager Koistra and Director Thompson, to you and all your staff. I've been getting a number of phone calls and inquiries and from community members, from electeds, from various people, and it has been nothing but positive, and people really impressed with how we've responded and how we've been able to bring service back online and how we've been trying to interact with the communities. So just make sure that's relayed to, to you and to all your staff. I mean, it's really a testament to how you can look at things creatively in situations that are tough. So I'm super proud of all of you. So, all right. So now we can move on to the business section of our agenda. First item of business is approval of the consent agenda. We have 2 items on consent tonight. Is there a motion to approve the items on consent?
Chair Barbara, this is Councilmember Sterner. I motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, moved by Sterner. Is there a second?
Second, Gonzalez.
Second by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Atlas Engelbrecht.
Aye.
Douglas.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Hudson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Turner.
Aye.
Zarin. Barber.
Aye. And the consent agenda is passed. Next, we move on to our non-consent items. The first one is item 2020-167, which is a same week item. Is it recommended release of the 2040 TPP update for public comment? And we have, I believe, Sarah Maskey and Amy Venowitz.
Yes, Madam Chair, can you hear me?
I can.
Amy Venowitz with MTS here. So the action we have before you today relates to releasing the update of the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan for public comment, and also setting a public hearing date for August 7th, 2020. So as you've been hearing over the past couple months, the TPP is a required document for the council and its role as the Metropolitan Planning Organization. The current plan was adopted in October 2018. Normally, we would not be updating the plan until 5 years hence in 2023. But as you have also heard, that put us in an awkward point in time because that's the same point in time when we will be in the process of developing the 2050 Regional Development Guide. So what we are doing now, this is probably something you've heard numerous times now, is adopting a minor update today, or actually today, releasing it for public comment, this year, adopting a minor update. And then that will put us in good shape for a major update along with the Regional Development Guide in 2050. So the new updated chapters are linked on the business item. The action today will release those chapters for public comment and review. And we have a short PowerPoint with Sarah Maskey and myself talking about what we will be doing during the outreach and comments that we have received to date. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah, and then I'll join back up at the end here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council members. I am getting an echo. Is that better?
I
Yes,
think
that's
that,
better.
yeah, I think that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. I'm Sarah Maskey. I work in the communications department and I support transportation services. Greg, could you go to the next slide, please? I just wanted to ground this in the development of the policy plan and how we create a shared vision for the regional transportation system. And we do that by collaborating with counties, cities, and townships. We build partnerships that make a stronger system possible, serving people and connecting to places across the region. We listen to our partners and the people who live in the region to hear what they want in a transportation system. And we translate that shared vision into investment plans and decisions that help build and maintain that system. Go next slide, please. As you'll see here, here's the timeline for the public comment period. We would start with today at Transportation Committee, which would release the TPP for public comment to the council. The council would release that for public comment finally on Wednesday. Then the public comment period would begin on the 25th. And by council policy, the public comment period extends for 45 days. And you'll see on July 27th that we are hosting a public hearing at the Transportation Committee. And the public hearing must be at least 10 days before the public comment period ends. And we do, of course, go through some formal processes in the final steps before the council would adopt the transportation policy plan in November. Next slide, please. So Amy's going to talk a little bit more about the formal council partners later in the presentation, but from our outreach and engagement audiences, we're talking to organizations, we're engaging with them, business, advocacy, cultural, workforce, education organizations, neighborhood groups, cities, counties, and townships throughout the Twin Cities region, and broadly, of course, the residents of the region. Next slide, please. And our outreach and engagement approach is to be socially connected while physically distant in these times. We're providing information, education, promotion, and engagement, both with our formal and informal partners. we're providing translated communications that allow those who don't speak or read English the opportunity to comment. Throughout the process, as themes emerge, we'll report those themes through our communications channels and to our partner organizations. And we can also provide a presentation on the feedback as requested by outside groups or within the Met Council as we go through the formal review channels. Next slide, please. The channels that we're using, we would use the council's website, newsletters, social media, and email. Actually, there's a natural pause point, Councilmember Atlas-Ingebretson, and we can stop there if that's okay.
That's perfectly, Councilmember Atlas-Ingebretson.
Thanks. I wanted to be respectful if you wanted to have questions at the end. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the formal and define what does formal and informal partners mean.
Sure.
As well as, go ahead.
It is, I need that charge for later though.
So the formal partners would be all of the formal committees and and boards. So the Transportation Advisory Board, its subcommittees. Those are all the formal channels that we use primarily to get input and feedback from the cities and townships and counties that populate the region. So that would be what I would consider to be the formal partners. And then the informal partners would be the partners that we work with on a regular basis, whether they be advocacy organizations, other nonprofits, other groups across the region that don't have a formal role within the council. Does that make sense?
And I would say we also talked a lot about reaching out to neighborhood organizations and things like that. We've got a pretty good network, and we've been working over the last little while to expand those contacts, and so that's part of what we're doing as well.
Chair, if I might.
Mm-hmm.
In some of our other efforts, we have contracted out to do engagement. Can you share a little bit, given the dynamics, and it's perfectly okay for the answer to this question to be, we don't know. Given the dynamics of COVID and the nature of how we've traditionally done engagement and been successful at engaging communities who are under heard from or represented in our findings, what are we doing differently? Are you thinking about doing differently? And if, like I said, if you're at a point where you don't kind of know how COVID's impacting strategy, that's okay too. We can hear about it when you do know.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging during this time to be doing outreach, and we recognize that, and we're trying to do some things a little more creatively to engage through some of our online channels, including social. I am absolutely open to working with any organization to provide a presentation or those kinds of things to get direct feedback. But as you said, we're still kind of working this through and kind of seeing how things are going. And I know one of our employees today shared an article that was in the Star Tribune, I think, this weekend about Mndot's success with online meetings, which is something I want to reach out to them and get a better feel for how they've been doing that and how they've been getting such good attendance.
Thank you. That was a great response. And I think that we do need to start collecting across all of our different efforts, best practices or promising practices right now, after a couple of calls today regarding other initiatives. So I think sharing that across the organization is helpful. And I think for council members to hear those promising practices are also good for us to know.
Thank you. All right, so I'll just jump back in here. Where was I? as I was mentioning before, we're going to reach out to key constituencies and find engagement opportunities that allow people to learn about the changes in the plan update, discuss related topics, and provide direct comment on the plan. So I mentioned the social media that we're going to be using and trying to be a little more creative around how we use it to gain feedback on the plan. As required, we place a classified ad in the Star Tribune. And then we are hosting an online public hearing in association with the Transportation Committee meeting on the 27th. We're currently in the process of setting up and testing WebEx events so the audience can actually join the meeting, raise their hand, make a comment. So we haven't done that to date yet, but that is something that we want to definitely do more of. And next slide, please. And much of the input into the transportation policy plan happens over time through studies. Like I think you just recently heard about the completed freeway interchange study. And I know that many of you have participated in the regional transit service allocation study. So all of that input changes and influences the plan when a minor update happens. But we do want to make sure that we have one more opportunity to provide feedback and guidance on the publication of the TPP update. We want that process to engage a cross-section of the region's residents, including residents from a range of different areas, race, ethnicity, nationality, age, and income levels. The council's partners, stakeholders, and constituents have the opportunity to engage with the process through appropriate and authentic engagement, and that the council is growing its capacity to interact with communities, stakeholders, and constituencies. Next slide, please. And these are just some examples of the social media that we're going to be looking at doing. These are very leading questions, and they are actually gearing more towards some of the new studies that were put into the plan. So for instance, we're talking a lot about COVID, obviously, but the first one you see here says some streets have temporarily restricted vehicle traffic to expand space for people walking, biking, and rolling. How do you see restricted streets playing a part after COVID-19? And then we link to the transportation policy plan and refer that we have a study that's studying that. We also have an electric vehicle study. So a similar question, what are your expectations or concerns about electric vehicles? And then obviously the teleworking issue has become very important as we've all been working from home. And for those people who have been able to work from home, we're asking if they're going to continue doing that and if they think their company would be supportive of that. So those are just a few examples of some of the social that I'm planning on. We have a few more questions on that, including public transportation, how that's changed dramatically during the outbreak, and what protections would you like to see before widespread transit service resumes. And then a question about greenhouse gas and the transportation sources. So what are you personally or your county, city, or township doing to reduce greenhouse gases from transportation sources? So really these are intended, again, to highlight some of the studies that were added to the transportation policy plan. And with that, I will pause and take any questions before moving on to Amy's part of the presentation.
All right, any other questions from council members so far? All right, over to Amy.
All right, next slide, please, Greg. So as Sarah mentioned, we have what we kind of refer to as both a formal process where we work with our partners through our formal TAB TAC process. And then we have our informal partners. What we have done with this update to date is to work through our formal process, bringing the document through TAC planning, TAC, TAB, the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, and then meeting with council members yourselves. Just through our internal process so far, we have over 100 kind of what I would label technical comments. They tend to be comments geared towards specifics of making the document better. Some of the comments, though, were bigger, broader comments that with a minor update would be hard to address. And we are working with our technical groups, and we'll be going back to them and talking about those bigger and broader comments. And those are comments that we intend to bring into the development of the 2050 plan, some of which are specifically transportation, but some of which really relate to bigger goals and objectives of the region. And so we think it's important to bring those forward and have that conversation along the way. We did get a number of letters during the technical comment period from Minneapolis, St. Paul, Apple Valley, and Ramsey County, along with a lot of informal emails. And as I had indicated earlier, the whole point of the technical formal review process is to put the best document possible out for public comment and review. So next slide. Some of the comments that we are going to be carrying forward into our 2050 plan discussion. We got a lot of comments just about climate change in general, but specifically about how we should be doing scenario planning and gauging how certain regional strategies can have an impact and the level of impact on climate change. That is something we intend to work on with community development, and that is in our work program. We had comments that were pretty broad, mainly from TAB, about better connecting our transportation vision with jobs and housing and a total regional vision. And that really occurs in the regional development guide. We're also doing work with community development on an economic strategy or framework for the region. And so once that is complete, that will also feed into the development of the 2050 plan. And that relates to the third bullet there about better connecting transportation to impacts on economic development. Then we got a number of comments about our access to destination goal and focusing less on congestion overall, and that congestion relief and reduction really isn't the goal. And part of our response to that comment is that we hope we're not sending that message with the current plan. The current plan isn't meant to focus on congestion, and the goal that we point to is the access to destinations goal. But having gotten this comment, we think we probably need to look at how we're saying that and demonstrating that in the current plan. So we will be doing that in 2050. And then finally, the final comment, and this will involve work with council members in the future, is particularly from Minneapolis and St. Paul, we got comments about setting regional goals or targets for reducing vehicle miles traveled, and whether that would be appropriate to have an adopted target, whether it's a per capita or a total reduction in regional vehicle miles traveled. It sounds kind of like a simple statement, but there's a lot of issues that revolve around that and how you balance growth with vehicle miles traveled. What happens if the vehicle miles traveled are increasing through electric means or means of reduced greenhouse gas emissions? And so given those other actions that will be happening, how does that relate to vehicle miles traveled, and how does it relate to emissions reductions overall? And then again, back to climate change strategies. So there's a lot buried into some of those comments, and I think it'll be exciting as we move into the 2050 plan to have those discussions with council members and our partners. Next slide, please, Greg. I just wanted to remind everyone what the 2018 comment period looked like. The The 2018 update was a more substantial update than this current update, so we don't really expect this level of comments, but we do expect a number of comments and hope to get a number of comments. In 2018, we got over 300 comments, 150 people and different organizations that made the comments. We had a number of presenters at the public hearing and received over 90 emails. In 2018, there were some current events that really kind of fed into the public comments that we received. We received 4 primary comments related to pushing us to electrify our transit fleet. There was concern over a diesel spill that it had not recently occurred, but information about it had recently been released, and there was concern about its environmental impact and also the lag in getting information out to the communities. There were comments related to eliminating racially biased transit fare enforcement, and related to that comment was the thought that potentially moving toward a free fare system would be important, and that would eliminate the need for fare enforcement overall. So we did get those comments, and there were a number of changes within the TPP talking about those issues specifically. Some of them, in all honesty, we really needed to pass on to Metro Transit. They were operationally based, but I expect to see some of these comments in this process, along with additional comments, given what the current environment is in the region. So with that, I can take any questions about our process of putting the update together, or we can move to the actual motion before you today.
Any questions for Amy? Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I have a question on whether or not you can elaborate on the focus on access to destinations goal on page 10 and what that means and what that consists of.
Well, the access to destination goal is really, in my mind, kind of the heart of our transportation goals. It really states that the purpose of transportation overall is to provide people access to the destinations that they're trying to get to, whether it's work, school, healthcare, groceries. And so the goal of transportation, or one of our 6 goals, and as I said, I really think this one is kind of a primary goal, is that the transportation systems should be providing access to all destinations throughout the region. And then there are different ways to measure access. And one of the ways that we measure access is vehicle miles traveled. So to some degree, vehicle miles traveled increasing might look at people more able to access destinations or able to access places that are farther. But vehicle miles traveled also relates to emissions. So an increasing VMT is not something that most people would want for the region because of its impact on the environment. So you kind of have conflicting things within a vehicle miles traveled measure. Both Minneapolis and St. Paul are adopting reduction in VMT per capita goals. I can't remember what the Minneapolis one is, but that, again, there's a mixed message in there because that is a goal of essentially reducing travel. And so having that discussion of part of the point of the transportation system is to allow people to travel and go and access destinations more easily, but also to minimize the impact on the environment. And vehicle miles traveled can be measuring both of those things.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
took me a second to unmute. Quick question. One, on the social media posts, one of the things that I've noticed for us is that kind of the ask for folks is not super clear. And so this is just something, just an idea, but having it be really clear what the ask is and then link to that ask in the post. If people have to go to a website and then read around to find out what to do, so I guess I want to be clear that, because you're asking questions in the posts, but then it's showing them the whole plan. So is the intent to get answers to those questions, or is it to get people to look at the plan and then comment on the plan as a whole?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you. It's a little bit of both. So I think I could potentially be more clear around asking people in the part where we mentioned the TPP that we are looking for comment on that. I think we were kind of leaning more towards the question itself and the response in the social media, but we didn't want to leave the TPP link out of it completely. So I think I could probably find a better compromise on that in how I do the language.
I just think it's really helpful to I think one of the things we need to be exploring is, do we take more of a small bite approach to understanding what people believe about certain things? It's hard to say, hey, take a look at this whole ginormous plan and then give us feedback on it. Honestly, I just think it's an unrealistic expectation. I think it makes sense to say there are people and target audiences that have particular interests, and to identify opportunities for them to chime in on that interest. We'd probably get more feedback as a result of that. So I encourage kind of innovative thinking around that. But I also think if we're thinking around how do we make it more accessible to people and not requiring that they read through the whole plan is a great idea. Or if they want to read through the plan, have a social media post out just for those folks, which there are some for. But I think if you're asking those kinds of specific questions and collecting feedback on them, which I think are really good, and there might be others, and this might be a very important way to do kind of micro collection of feedback in a way that increases input at a time when the ways that we have, frankly, haven't been always that fruitful collected input on plans, but also right now are complicated due to some of the natures presented by COVID-19. My other wonderment is, do we know how much it would cost us to have a fare-free transit system in the metro area? I don't expect, Sarah, you to necessarily know that question, but
well,
Councilor, I'm kind of throwing that out there. Maybe you do.
Madam Chair, Council Member Ingebrigtsen, we had, after the last plan, we did some internal work looking at what other regions or other cities, both nationally and worldwide, have done with free fare systems. And we have a memo, kind of a white paper that we're developing and we'll share with council members at a later date about regions and cities that have done a free fare system. There really isn't a major system in the country or world that has gone totally fare free. There are a number of subsidy programs similar to our TAP program that people use. But the short answer is our system collects about $120 million a year through fares. It's about 20 to 22% of our overall budget. Arguably, getting rid of fares also reduces fare collection costs and some personnel costs. And so there are cost savings along with the free fare system. So the net wouldn't be the whole 120 million, but that would be kind of the top end and balanced against some actual cost savings.
Yeah, so it will be coming back to us to look at some of just this analysis of different systems. But this is really in response to the last round of the TPP comments, and we can just ask that they factor in some of that, the cost of collecting fares, and so we can get an understanding of what that number actually is.
And Madam Chair, if I could comment.
That's our
Madam, thank you, Madam Chair and Council Member. Just you brought up a very poignant point, is that most regular people probably don't read the transportation policy plan, and there are a few gems out there who are willing to sit down and read all of that. But yeah, the social media, the intent was really to get to some of those individual questions, things that people are interested in, things that are current, things that are, that we're hearing more about. And I did actually kind of tie all the COVID ones back to the recent TBI COVID survey, which you're going to hear a little bit more about later. So trying to kind of add to that feedback. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think we need to put out a post that says, here, comment on the TPP for all of you people who are willing to read the whole thing. And then have the balance out with the particular questions. So thank you for that comment.
Okay, any other additional questions or comments? Hearing none, I would then entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-167, same week.
Chair Barbara, this is Councilmember Sterner. I would make a motion to approve the item.
All right, moved by Sterner. Is there a second?
Cummings, second.
Second by Cummings. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Jenna, could you take the roll, please?
Aye.
Chambliss?
Aye.
Cummings?
Aye.
Ferguson?
Ferguson? Aye.
Fredson?
Aye.
Gonzalez?
Aye.
Turner? Zarin? Barbara?
Aye. The motion carries.
You just lost sound, Deb.
Hang on, let me come back. All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Next is business item number 2020-174, which is North Star Locomotive HEP Genset Overhaul Contract 19P216. And we have Ryan Stelmach here, I believe.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Ryan Stelmach. I'm a maintenance supervisor at North Star, and I'm here today to present the North Star HEP engine overhaul contract, which is business item 2020-174. Our locomotive fleet uses 5 Caterpillar C27 engine generator combination sets that provide power to our commuter cars. This power is distributed to provide lighting, Wi-Fi, climate control, among other things, to our customers, as well as providing us the ability to operate the train from the cab car, which is traveling east towards Minneapolis. In nearly 11 years of operation, our HEP engines have accumulated over 20,000 hours of service, and Caterpillar recommends overhaul at 18,000 hours of operation to prevent serious failure. There was no DBE goal set for this project due to a limited number of DBE vendors in this sector. When I was looking for possible vendors, I was only able to find 2 DBE diesel generator service companies. Both were more geared towards the generator side and only provided preventative maintenance services for the diesel engine. The contract was advertised on January 15th. We had 6 bidders download documents. A pre-bid meeting was held on January 29th. Bids opened February 29th, resulting in a single bid received by Ziegler Caterpillar in Minneapolis. An adequate competition analysis was conducted by procurement. It determined there was adequate competition and our specifications were not restrictive. Ziegler Cat was determined to be responsive and responsible by procurement. My proposed action is for the council to authorize the regional administrator to execute contract 19P216 with Ziegler Caterpillar in an amount not to exceed $506,839.55. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. This concludes my presentation. With that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Ryan. Are there any questions from council members? All right, hearing none, I entertain a motion to approve business item number 2020-174.
So moved by Gonzalez.
Moved by Gonzalez
Second, Cummings.
and second by Cummings. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Jenna, would you call the roll, please?
Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Sterner.
He says aye, but he can't hear anyone, or he's having a hard time.
That was for the last one I have recorded,
Okay,
so maybe it's still happening.
okay.
Sterner, if you can just let us know when you're able to through the chat, whether you vote aye or nay. Ciaran. Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you, Ryan. Next, we're on to our next business item. It's number 2020-175. It's amendment to contract 14R038 for transit advertising. We have Bruce Howard here.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Transportation Committee. Bruce Howard, Director of Marketing and Transit Information. And I'm here today to present to you an amendment to the existing intersection contract. And that proposed action then would be for the Metropolitan Council to authorize the regional administrator to approve an amendment to the Intersection Media LLC contract based on the attached term sheet, providing temporary relief for the contractor from the monthly minimum annual guaranteed payments owed the council under that contract. And I will provide some background for you next. So Metro Transit and Intersection Media LLC entered into a 5-year contract in May of 2015. And last year we executed 2 one-year contract extensions, bringing the current contract end date to April 30th of 2022. So this contract with Intersection provides for them to have exclusive rights to sell advertising space on our buses, trains, shelters, and other assets. The contract requires Intersection to share ad revenues with Metro Transit on a 35-65% split, 65% going to Metro Transit. The contract also has a provision for a minimum annual guarantee of revenue due to Metro Transit at the end of each year. So Intersection will end up paying Metro Transit the greater of the revenue share at 65% or whatever that particular minimum annual guarantee is for the contract year. So for example, this current contract year, our minimum annual guarantee is $5.1 million. And so Intersection essentially needs to generate about $7.8 million in revenues, at which 65% would be around 5.1 million. If they would generate anything less than that, they would owe us that 5.1 million in terms of the guarantee. So that's kind of how the contract works with the revenue share and the minimum annual guarantee. So in March of this year, Intersection notified Metro Transit that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was having significant impacts on their advertising revenue business. And not only here in the Twin Cities, but across the country, of course, all the other markets where they operate with transit agencies in Chicago, LA, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Dallas, to name a few. Essentially, advertisers were significantly cutting back on their ad spending or pausing ad spending altogether as these stay-home orders across the country were keeping customers away from businesses, as you can certainly understand. So Intersection approached all of the transit agencies that they do business with and asked us if we would suspend our MAG requirements for the rest of 2020 and perhaps into 2021 as well. But in talking to the other agencies, and I have talked to other transit agencies, LA Metro, DART in Dallas, CTA in Chicago, all transit agencies that work with Intersection, and they all seem understanding to this request by Intersection. So essentially, staff talked through some of the options and came up with the term sheet that is with this business item today, and it would amend the contract in two ways. First of all, for the contract year that we just finished, and our contract year is not on a calendar year, so you may be wondering about these dates. That's why. For the sake of calculating the MAG, or the minimum annual guarantee of this contract that we just finished up here, we would actually shorten it to an 11-month term. So from May 19th through March of 2020. And for that period, you can see here in the business item that the shared revenues were $4.1 million compared to a MAG of 4.6. And so what we would ask then from Intersection is for them to continue to true up that and pay us that 4.6 million that they would owe us with that minimum guarantee in place through that 11-month term of that contract. And then we would begin to have revenue share only starting in April of this year, going through December of this year. And so you can see the numbers there. That would be about 81. They would pay the remaining MAG that they would owe us since they were short in terms of revenue generated with the revenue share at $81,157 per month over six months. So this was a little bit of a negotiation back and forth. They wanted to true up the contract in February because, of course, in March, all of the businesses started to close, advertising revenues disappeared. We wanted to start this revenue share only with the May month, the month of May. And so we compromised on starting it in April and having the true up for the contract to go through for March. I guess then that assuming you approve this amendment today, as I mentioned, we'd move to a revenue only share, or revenue share only for this contract from April through December. And there would be no minimum guarantee in place for those months. And of course, then it would depend upon, how much revenue they generated as to what kind of revenue we could expect from the contract. Talking with Intersection and looking at what they've sold already out through the end of the year, their best guess is that they would probably be about 50% of where they typically would be in terms of advertising sales for the rest of the year. And so when we looked at that and compared that to the MAG that would be in place in the contract, that would mean perhaps about $1.4 million less to Metro Transit than if we would leave the minimum annual guarantee in place. So you might be asking, well, why wouldn't we just continue to enforce the contract the way that it is? And that's a good question. When we looked at it, there were several reasons that we were inclined to go along with Intersection's request. First of all, is that this request to drop the minimum annual guarantee for 9 months is really not a fault of Intersection. This is the fault of a pandemic, and so it's something that's outside of their control. We also looked at it and determined that if we did try to hold the contract as it was today, they would probably go into default of that contract. It would be somewhat questionable as to what types of dollars we could actually get from them if the contract was in default and they decided to close their office here and essentially move out of this market. And then the third thing, our legal staff did advise after looking at this that because we provide exclusive rights to intersection in the contract, we provide a certain number of buses, trains, shelters that are available for advertising, and in return, they guarantee us this minimum amount. Over the last several months, we've not had that number of buses and trains out on the street since we've reduced service. Of course, many of our shelters were damaged recently, and so those are not available. And so again, there'd be some question about whether we'd be able to hold them to that minimum guarantee anyway. So that's kind of a brief overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Bruce? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Howard. I don't really have a question, just a comment, and I just really appreciate you giving us a thorough presentation and also anticipating our questions about, why we modified the contract. It was a very helpful presentation. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Additional questions, Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment, really. These are extraordinary times, and no one could anticipate that we would have a pandemic that would affect the operations throughout the country, much less in our area. So it seems to me only reasonable and fair, taking into consideration the dramatic change for all of us. And I appreciate the presentation too, Mr. Howard. It was very thorough and really helped understand, but it seems to only make sense the way you have presented it to me.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? All right, Bruce, I want to apologize for mumbling or hearing me try and hurt a teenager through part of your presentation. So sorry for that. So, all right, he is out of the camper now, so that we were successful on that front. So hearing no other questions or comments, I would then entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-175.
Cummings moves.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second? Second by Frenzen. And is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll?
Atlas Engebretson.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Aye.
And
the
Sterner,
motion.
can you state for the record your last vote? On 2020-175? Or sorry, 174.
174.
Was that Sterner?
Yes, Sterner.
Yes.
Yes. Aye, please. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And so with that, business item 2020-175 passes. Next, we're on to business item 2020-176, the same week item, Southwest LRT, Fourth Amendment to the Hennepin County and Hennepin County Regional Authority Capital Grant Agreement. We have Kristen Prescott here to talk.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. Can you see me? My name is Kristen Prescott. I'm manager of budget and grants at the Southwest project. Today I'm presenting business item 2020-176. Excuse me, this is the Fourth Amendment to the Hennepin County and Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority Capital Grant Amendment for the Limited Notice to Proceed, or LNTP period. Maybe just a little history. December 2018, the council executed a capital grant agreement with Hennepin County and Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority to provide funding in the amount of 434.9 million. And that was going to take us through August of 2019. This funding allowed us to complete engineering, award the civil construction contract, and issue an LNTP for civil construction work. The grant amendment at this point has been amended 3 times to increase the funding amount to 602.7 million and through June of 2020. We now need an amendment to the capital grant agreement again to increase the amount and extend the grant through August of 2020 and allow us to continue civil and systems construction activities, as well as add funding for the Franklin facility modifications and the SCADA contract. So the recommendation for business item 2020-176 is to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute the 4th Amendment to the Capital Grant Agreement with Hennepin County and Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority to extend the duration to August 31st, 2020, adding 74.9 million and bringing the grant to $677.7 million.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members? Okay, hearing none, then I would entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-176, the same week item.
So moved by Gonzalez.
So moved. Okay.
Moved by Gonzalez, second by Fredson.
Sterner, yes, it was.
Oh, second by Sterner. All right. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Jenna, would you call the roll, please?
Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Next, we are on to business item 2020-141, which is a joint same week amended business item. We have Ed Petrie here.
Good afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Once again, I'm Ed Petrie. I'm Director of Finance with Metro Transit. This is a follow-up item to the item that Ms. Prescott just presented. She presented the business item for amending the grant, and now I'm going to be presenting the business item so we can bring the funds into the capital budget so we can expend the funds through August of 2020. Business item number 2141 JT was originally presented to the Transportation Committee on June 8th and to the Management Committee on June 10th, and it was passed unanimously by both boards or both committees. What we're recommending this evening is to back it back into the Transportation Committee so we can recognize these funds, the $74.9 million for the Southwest line from Hennepin County funding. On the second page of the amendment, you'll notice under the authorized new projects, we have put in a bold box and highlighted the change for the Southwest project, which would be recognizing the $68.975 million from Hennepin County funding and the $5.994 million from Hickory funding for the grant agreement for the limited notice to proceed to extend it through August 2020, which equals the $74.9 million that Ms. Prescott just discussed. And Madam Chair, that is the only change to the amended item. Once again, we're bringing it back so we can recognize the funds, bring it into the capital budget so we can expend the money. And with that, Madam Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ed. Are there any questions from council members? All right, if not, I would entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-141 joint same week.
Motion to approve by Chambliss.
Motion by Chambliss. Is there a second?
Second.
second by Fredson. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson. Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Aye. And the motion carries. Thank you,
Thank
Ed.
you.
All right. Next, we're on to item 2020-177. It's another Southwest LRT business item. It's a cooperative construction agreement with St. Louis Park. We have Jim Alexander here.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to check to make sure you can hear me okay.
I can, thank you.
All right, this is Jim Alexander, Project Director for the Southwest LRT. Tonight, business item 2020-177 relates to a cooperative construction agreement we'd like to do with St. Louis Park and their Economic Development Authority. So the proposed action here is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a cooperative construction agreement with the City of St. Louis Park for the construction of a parking structure at the Beltline Station. A little background on this is the project is always intended to have a park and ride at this location, and we currently have in our plan a 268 stall surface lot. It's the desire of the Economic Development Authority, the EDA of the City of St. Louis Park, to build out this block area where we have this program lot and into a parking structure and associated development. And so what this construction agreement will do is it allows the city to build this facility, and we would fund $2.5 million out of the project budget that's currently budgeted under the $2 billion amount into this effort. We already have that programmed into the project, so it's no additional funds are required for the project. But essentially, would allow Metro Transit to have 268 parking stalls for the public transit use at the Beltline Station. And with this construction agreement, it would allow us, the council, to have approval rights over elements of the design of the parking structure. And we'd also have rights over the terms of any reciprocal easement agreement for the structure and terms of any operation and maintenance agreement that would follow. This is a follow-on to a letter of intent that we signed back in December of 2016. And so this would culminate in the cooperative construction agreement. So it allows the city to build this structure and allows the project and Metro Transit, the council, to have 268 parking stalls. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for any questions.
Hey, are there any questions for Jim? I'd look to entertain 77.
Fredson, so moved.
Moved by Fredson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Atlas Ingebretson.
Okay, so, second by Atlas Ingebretson. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Ferguson. Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Ms. Barber, are you talking? Chair Barber?
Yep. I know I can't. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I disappeared there for a second. So aye. All right, so with that, that motion is also approved. So before we move on to information items, we need to decide what goes to consent. I would say that business items 2, 3, and 6 can go on consent. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay, then we will go with that. So, all right, then we're on to our information item, which is a COVID-19 update. We have Jonathan Ehrlich and Ashley Asmus here to present.
Hi, Chair Barber. This is Ashley Asmus, and I'll just
Hi,
wait for a second while Greg pulls up the presentation.
Perfect.
And Greg, if you don't mind, I'll request control again. Let me see if I can do that. Cool. Oh, that worked. Okay. So thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to present this new material to you. We have a lot of findings in here, and some of the data and some of the slides are pretty information rich. So please feel free to chime in if you have questions, especially clarifying questions. And if we don't finish all the material today, I would be happy to come back and present the remainder to you. So Chair, if you see a time where you need to tell me to wrap it up, please do so. Thank you. Right. 1 second, I'm just trying to make sure. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we conducted this survey, a panel survey, because we were observing rapid changes to travel behavior, especially the amount of traffic that was occurring in the region. And we wanted to understand whether some of the travel behavior changes that we were seeing might become permanent. This was especially true for questions around teleworking and online shopping, also delivery services, among a variety of other things that we were observing happening in our communities. We were also observing and concerned by the disproportionate effects of COVID-19 on the health and economy of communities of color and low-income households in the region. We wanted to better understand equity of access to recreation and trails because we were observing so many people getting outside to spend time outdoors. And curious and concerned about anticipated changes to revenue with the motor vehicle sales tax and also transit fares. And finally, Metro Transit wanted to better understand which policies that would help riders feel safe riding transit, which policies would encourage riders to come back. So we wanted to conduct this survey as quickly as possible. And to do that, what we did was we relied on our pool of travel behavior inventory participants from 2019. Any adult who participated in the 2019 TBI, provided an email address and agreed to be recontacted, was eligible to participate in this survey. So we sent emails to all these folks. On the whole, it was 8,800 eligible adults. We had about a 37% response rate and got 3,200 responses back. All of the data that I'm going to be presenting in this presentation, unless I otherwise noted, is weighted data. So that's where we've weighted individual responses to better reflect the whole regional population by a variety of demographic factors, including race, age, income, and household size. Our survey was conducted, people could respond to it between May 14th and May 22nd. But in most cases, we asked people about their travel in the preceding week. So this will really capture travel changes between May 7th and May 22nd or so. Our final data set, we just received it June 9th, and we have 2 additional waves planned where the survey will be nearly identical to this one, and we'll do one in the late summer, early fall, and one in the winter, although the exact timing of each of these is kind of up in the air as we wait to see what changes over time. So this is a graph of traffic trends relative to our survey. You can see this is the amount of that traffic has decreased relative to a baseline. That's the horizontal line at 0 from March 8th all the way to last week. And I've just pulled the data for last weekend as well. So, you know, at its lowest point, traffic on metro area freeways and statewide was 60 or even 70% lower than normal. When we fielded the survey, traffic was about 40% lower than normal. And And that's in the shaded blue area there on the figure. Our survey also coincided with the date that the stay-at-home order expired on May 18th. But like I said before, most of the responses or most of the questions ask about the previous week's travel. So for the most part, we'll be seeing travel behavior changes before that stay-at-home order was lifted. You can see updated traffic data on our app at this website here. So we asked a lot of questions on this survey. These are just some of the topics that we asked about, and I have a slide at the end of the presentation that lists all the topics in a little bit more detail. We asked about work and employment status. We asked about travel that doesn't have to do with work, which is the majority of people's travel, shopping trips, online shopping and delivery services, also telehealth. We were interested in whether people were replacing travel for health reasons. We asked about recreation, and we also asked some attitudinal questions around how people were perceiving COVID-19. Now, in addition to the data that we've collected just in this survey, all the responses in the survey can be linked back to the 2019 TBI because we still have that unique identifier for the person. So we can look back and see what these people did in 2019, compare their behavior both in that survey and in this survey. And there's some examples of that in this presentation. I'm going to start here. This was a question that we borrowed from the Pew Research Center American Trends panel. We asked people how they were thinking about COVID-19, how much of a threat they saw it as a threat to public health, to their own health, and to the health of others in their household. The red bars here show you the percent of adults who said that COVID-19 was a major threat to their own health or to public health or to the health of others in their household. And the take home here is that the vast majority of adults in our survey said that COVID-19 was a major threat or at least some threat to their health or to the health of others. And this finding is in line with what we're seeing at a national level as well. We can compare it back to what Pew Research is finding for the American public as a whole. In our survey, additionally, we asked whether people had tested for COVID-19. We found that 2% of respondents had been tested for COVID-19, but much less than 1% had actually tested positive. And 10% of respondents said that they believed they previously had COVID-19, regardless of whether they'd tested positive for it. So this might be people who had symptoms in February or March before testing was widespread, or maybe they didn't have access to testing. We wanted to understand how people were perceiving their own threat level. We broke this question down by race. So this is how that same set of responses differs across race, with white adults here on the left, Black and African American adults here in the middle, Hispanic and Latinx, and Asian adults. And across the board, we see that Black and African American adults, Hispanic adults, and Asian adults are all more likely, significantly more likely, to see COVID-19 as both a personal health threat and as a public health threat relative to white adults. And that also is in line with what we're seeing nationwide in the Pew survey. This slide is sort of another attitudinal question. So it's titled here, Feeling Safe on Board Public Transit. Our friends at Metro Transit Strategic Initiatives put this data together for us. The question asked, how likely are you to use public transit without a vaccine, given the specified measure? So the measures are listed from left to right on this figure here, with masks being mandatory on the left and rear door boarding all the way on the right. They're kind of arranged from most favorable to least favorable or least likely to increase ridership over on the right. We only asked this of transit riders, which was 825 people in our survey. Of note, we asked in the survey, how likely would you be to use public transit if masks were mandatory? But just as the survey was going out, face masks became mandatory for all riders. Now, about half of respondents said that they were neutral or unlikely to ride transit without a vaccine, regardless of the measures that you put in place. So that was an important finding with this one. We also found that rear door boarding, which is that measure all the way here on the right, was not as important as the other measures in the survey, which could facilitate Metro Transit as they door boarding and fare collection. Okay, I'm going to switch to some meaty slides that really center on employment and work commutes. And I want to say up front that, work travel is a really small amount of people's travel. It's about 1/5 of travel regionally. But this story, I think you'll see, kind of unites a lot of different threads of the effects of COVID-19 that we're observing in the region and in our communities. I'm going to start with our unemployment and our employment numbers so that we have these up front, because the rest of the findings that I'll be presenting to you are like in this context. What we're finding in our survey is 15% unemployment, 8% of workers who lost their jobs, and 7% of workers who are furloughed, the majority of whom are furloughed without pay. Now, our 15% number is probably an underestimate. Estimates from the Met Council Community Development Research Team that's relying on really up-to-date deed filings from the Minnesota state. They're estimating 25% unemployment for the region. I talked to the researchers on this project, and they thought that the true number probably lies somewhere between that 15 and 25%, just to say that the unemployment numbers are all. Here I'm breaking down unemployment by income, with lowest income on the left and highest income on the right. The red bars are those who are unemployed, and the white with the red text are those who are furloughed. Again, the vast majority of whom are furloughed without pay. So what we're seeing is that unemployment is highest for the lowest income households. It's 45% for households that are making less than $25,000 a year. Oh, and just a note here that we asked about 2019 household income. So we asked, what was your income last year, and are using that as the horizontal axis here. We've also broken down these unemployment numbers by race, and slightly higher unemployment numbers among workers of color in our sample. But probably the more robust sample and the more robust data is coming from the Met Council research team. They're seeing that there's 38% unemployment among Black workers, 47% unemployment among Indigenous workers, compared to 23% unemployment for white workers. And I've got the link here to that research here. They've been updating it regularly, they said, so it would be a good link to revisit over time. We asked about changes to employment beyond layoffs. So we're seeing, a lot of workers who are having their hours reduced or their pay cut, workers in households making less than $50,000 a year are more likely to see their hours reduced or to be furloughed without pay relative to workers in higher income households. Okay, so with that story about unemployment as sort of a backdrop, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about how that relates to transportation. So we asked this question, how has your work commute changed? And we split it up by mode. So people who used to drive to work, take transit, walk or roll using a wheelchair, for example, bike, those who teleworked, and then also by employment status. So people who are unemployed or furloughed or unemployed and not looking. That could include some people who've left the labor force and also some number of people who've entered the labor force since before and after the COVID-19 outbreak. So I'm going to split this up by household income. I'm going to start with households making more than $50,000 a year. The majority of workers in these households, 83%, used to drive to work, 6% took public transit, 5% teleworked, and just 2% were unemployed. Now here's what it looks like in May. We've got 33% continuing to drive to work, 54% teleworking, and unemployment has increased to 10%. A really big shift over time. I'm going to illustrate to you how that's changed for each of these categories. So these horizontal flows are just showing you the number of workers that have moved from one kind of way of getting to work to another. So you see about 1/3 of workers who used to drive are still driving, but more are teleworking, and then a handful are unemployed or have left the labor market. Okay, so now let's look at those who were unemployed before. Oh, and just a handful are taking transit, yeah. All right, so if you were unemployed before, you're most likely to be unemployed now. Although a handful of these folks have entered the labor market and are using a variety of modes to get to work. Most of those who were teleworking before are teleworking now. And here's the share for transit. The majority of these folks are now teleworking, although a handful do continue to take transit or switch to driving to work. And we also did biking and walking and rolling. Those counts are a little bit lower here, so there's kind of a little bit of a tangle going on there. Okay, now I'm going to split this out for households making less than $50,000 a year. 64% of these workers drove to work, 10% took transit, and 12% were unemployed before the COVID-19 outbreak. We've also got some folks who were outside of the labor market, not looking before, who are now in the labor market now. And this is what it looks like now for workers in households making less than $50,000. A third, again, drive to work. Only 24% are teleworking, and 34% are unemployed or furloughed. And then I can illustrate these flows for you too, starting with those who are unemployed now. So those who were unemployed before continue to be unemployed now, although a surprising number have moved into the workforce and are mostly teleworking. Those who were teleworking before are teleworking now. And transit. So about a third of transit customers or transit commuters are now unemployed. There's a small number teleworking, a small number continuing to take transit, and a small number driving. And here's the share for driving. So this again kind of breaks up into thirds, with most people continuing to drive to work or teleworking and about a third unemployed. And again, we've got our walkers, bikers, and rollers, a smaller sample here. Okay, so I just want to pause and sum up here and say, here's some numbers just to kind of like sum up all that really complex slide from just before. So relative to pre-outbreak conditions and including those newly unemployed, the number of car commuters has shrunk by 58%, bike commuters shrank by 67%, and transit commuters shrank by 85%. Meanwhile, teleworkers increased 8 times over their pre-outbreak levels. So we wanted to understand a bit more about teleworking. And let's see, I'm getting close to 6 p.m. So maybe I'll pause there and ask Chair Barber, would you like me to present the teleworking slides now, or shall I save that for later?
I'm coming back on. So council members, how many more? There's quite a few slides still left, aren't there, Ashley?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
To me, this was a great presentation at TAB, and I learned a ton, so I want to make sure it gets enough time. So I just sort of want to get a feeling for what the rest of the council members feel. There's a question from council member Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Are we asking if we pause and then have the rest of this at a future meeting, or if we can pause for questions and then continue on?
I think pause and have the rest at a future meeting.
Okay, I would, I know I'm dealing with a migraine, so, and I think this is important information, so I'd love to have a pause and then have more at a future meeting. And I also have just an overall question.
Well, go ahead and ask the question, and if we've got a couple of questions, then we can, Ashley can prepare ahead of the next meeting. So go ahead.
So, okay, so one of the things and this is all the way back to the beginning, 27% of the metro area population is made up by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And it was 9% of the respondents. And I understand the science of waiting for statistics, for statistical purposes, to get the idea as a representational response. I just don't, there's so much diversity in those communities, and they're not monolithic groups. And I just really worry about having such a low number of them and then waiting to draw very important understandings, and American Indian is not even included.
So
I'm just wondering if there's more that could be done around that.
So I'll make a quick comment and then turn it back to Ashley. So part of the reason, like we're using people who responded to the prior TBI because we wanted to get some quick data. I think just exactly what you're talking about is what we're doing in sort of our forward-looking piece. This is just a snapshot of people that at least we have quick access to. But I think I know just in conversations with Ashley and Jonathan, they agree with what you're saying as we move forward. But in some sense of speed and urgency, we utilize the same data set for some of this analysis. But I do think you are correct that we do need to expand it out. Ashley, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point, Chair Barber and council members. Yeah, our sample size from Indigenous people in our survey was simply too low to present data disaggregated by that category here, which is really disappointing. I think we can continue to try to recruit from our 2019 survey respondents, and we'll continue to do so, especially from these hard to reach populations and areas where we know we need to boost our sample size. So hopefully we'll get more response in our future waves. I think we've toyed with different incentives over time as well, survey incentives. And there's some forward-looking work to try to increase the representativeness of our sample in 2021 as well. So we're working with our consultants in that area.
Chair, if I might just quickly.
Of course.
I don't think these populations are hard to reach. I think institutionally we use practices that don't reach them. And there's a difference between the two. And if I need to be of assistance offline to aid in that, I am happy to. But I really, given all that's going on in our community, nationally and across the world, we have to change the narrative around this.
I 100% agree with that. And I think that it was valuable for us to get some very quick data, but I do think that as we talk about going back out, that we look if there's good ways to scientifically build onto an expanded group of people that we can kind of continue to leverage this base set of data. But the initial, as we go through this, you'll see, I think as we're trying to make decisions in short term, this helps us, but it isn't the long-term story. All right, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that with the group that has been studied and in terms of the impact with COVID, the numbers that are coming out, they're both alarming and not surprising as far as the disparity with income and race. As we know, when you take a situation that's disparate and then you put on top of that the pandemic and other economic stresses, it just amplifies the situation. And these kind of numbers are so large in terms of disparate impact that it's impacting all of us.
Mm-hmm.
When you have that many people who are unemployed or on furlough, and this is over an extended period of time, and they were already had low incomes, we have a serious crisis here. So I really appreciate having this information to validate that, that this is a crisis. And this needs to be on social media too. People need to know that, there's the folks that make under 50,000 a year are not giving or don't have the opportunity to telework. And what does that mean? It means some of them, well, much of that group is largely unemployed because they can't telework. And I've been telling my friends that, so it's validating what we already know. And this needs to be highlighted.
And I think as you get even further into this data, you will see it more and more. I think that, because we are running long, one of the things that we talked about at our last meeting was having some equity-based discussions and how do we focus that relative to transportation. And one of the things that I've been talking with Nick and Wes about is we focus a lot on transit, but there's also all these other ways that people are traveling and moving about the city. And I think that in the region that we need to start looking at some of that too. So I think this could be a nice way to segue into those two conversations together of what can we do within the committee based off of this initial data, and then how do we want to dig into it so we can tie it to our transportation planning. All right, Council Member Atlas Ingebrigtsen, I think I saw you had another comment.
I missed it. It was unintentional. I just typed.
Oh.
There was no intent behind that. Sorry. Thank you.
That's
my
okay.
migraine is taking over.
Well, and that's why we want to have a good, robust discussion. So before we go, I do want to see if any other council members have comments or questions for Ashley, so she can kind of consider things before our next meeting.
And Chair, if I might, you're also welcome to email me if you browse through the presentation and you see something or that you'd like for me to touch on next time. I would welcome an email as well.
All right. Anyone else? All right. Along the lines of emailing comments and things, we were hoping to have a few minutes to talk about, work plan items related to equity and reducing disparities at the end of this meeting, but clearly we've run long already. I've talked with both Wes and Nick, and we have some ideas, but I want all of your ideas. So if you've got specific work items that, like I said, apply to transportation, transit, this side of what the work we really get into detail here on, please send those to Jenna, and we will try and start working things into our future agendas and conversations so that we're tackling and talking about the right things. So, all right. All right. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you for the patience with us. So we appreciate it. Does anyone have any closing comments or anything? All right. If there is no objection, we will be adjourned.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you very
you.
much. Great questions tonight.